The dog wouldn't move. Not when the officer shouted. Not when the rain hit harder. Not even when the headlights flashed right in his eyes. He just stood there, soaked, trembling, blocking the narrow road over something lying still in the mud. "Get him off the road!" the officer yelled, stepping out of the cruiser. But as soon as he took a step forward, the German shepherd growled, low, warning, desperate. Then they saw it. Under the dog's front legs, half covered in wet leaves, was a small cat, barely breathing. The officer froze. The cat's fur was matted with blood, her chest rising shallowly. The dog looked up at him again, eyes pleading, then nudged the cat's side as if to say, "She's still here, don't touch her like that." The radio crackled. "Unit 12, do you need assistance?" He didn't answer. He crouched slowly, trying to read the situation. One injured cat, one protective dog, no collar on either. The rain was turning the dirt into sludge. The cat's paw twitched once. That's when the dog barked. Short, urgent, almost like he was calling for help. "If you think you've seen loyalty," the officer muttered under his breath, "you haven't seen this." He pulled his jacket off, placed it gently over the cat. The dog immediately leaned closer, pressing his nose to her fur, whining softly. "Easy, boy," the officer said. "I'm helping." The dog didn't back away, but he didn't attack either. He just watched. His body was shaking, not from fear, from cold, exhaustion, something deeper. The flashlight revealed marks around the cat's neck, rope burns. Someone had tied her. The officer's stomach turned. Who would? He didn't finish. The dog growled again, but not at him this time. He was looking toward the trees. Movement. The beam of light swept through the dark brush, a trail of footprints, big ones, fresh. The officer called for backup. The rain was washing away evidence by the second, but something about this scene didn't fit a random stray attack. The dog hadn't just found her, he was guarding her. He'd been there for hours, maybe all night. When the second unit arrived, the first thing they heard was that same sound, the low, steady whine of a dog who refused to give up. "Jesus," one officer said, "he won't even let us near her." "Let him stay," the first replied. "He's not the problem here." They loaded the cat gently into a blanket, and only then did the dog allow himself to move. He followed the stretcher to the car door and jumped in without a word from anyone. Inside the cruiser, the cat's faint breathing filled the silence. The dog sat beside her, staring at the officer through the divider, eyes wide, as if demanding he drive faster. No one spoke during the ride. The rain hit the windshield like static. When they reached the shelter's emergency bay, the vet on duty took one look and frowned. "She's in shock," she said. "But look at this." She pointed to the wounds around the neck. "These aren't from a fight. Someone tried to hang her." The room went silent. The officer looked down at the dog, who hadn't left the cat's side since they found her. His fur was still dripping, paws caked in mud, but his eyes were fixed on her, the way people look at something they can't afford to lose. "Whatever happened out there," the vet whispered, "he wasn't just passing by, he saved her." The dog lowered his head onto the cold floor beside the cat's stretcher. His breathing slowed. Rainwater pooled beneath them both, mixing with traces of blood. And that's when the officer noticed, on the dog's flank, a deep cut, like he'd fought someone off. He stepped closer, heart pounding. "This wasn't an accident," he said quietly. "They were both left for dead." The dog opened his eyes halfway, just long enough to meet his gaze. Then he sighed, a sound too human for a creature that couldn't speak. "If you think animals don't understand loyalty, wait until you hear what this dog had been protecting all along." The vet looked at him. "Then this isn't over," she whispered. Miller didn't respond. He was still watching the window, the faint reflection of Buddy's eyes in the glass. The dog hadn't looked away once. He was rigid now, ears high, nostrils flaring, like he'd caught a scent only he could recognize. Outside, the wind began to pick up again, the kind of wind that carried memories. It whistled through the gaps of the old shelter windows, rattling the metal cages one by one, until the whole corridor sounded like distant chains. The volunteers were locking up for the night. One by one, the lights went out down the hall. Miller lingered. He didn't know why. Maybe it was habit, maybe it was worry. But as the last bulb flickered above him, he caught something faint. Buddy's low growl, deep and steady, vibrating through the concrete floor. "Easy, boy," Miller said softly. Buddy didn't move. His eyes were fixed on the far corner of the shelter, the exit door that led to the loading dock. A sound came from the other side. Barely there. A scrape. Then another. Miller turned toward it, hand instinctively moving to his sidearm. The vet froze beside him. The sound stopped. Silence pressed down so hard it made the room feel smaller. Even the rain outside had paused, waiting, and then through the narrow window in the door, a faint beam of light flickered once, like a flashlight sweeping across, then vanishing again. Miller stepped forward. Buddy barked once, sharp, urgent, then ran to stand between him and the door. The vet caught her breath. "Miller," she whispered, "maybe we should—" He raised a hand, listening. Nothing, just the hum of the fluorescent light above, and Buddy's ragged breathing. Still, something about the air had changed, heavier now, colder. Miller couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching. Not the way a stranger looks, the way someone familiar checks to see if they left a loose end behind. He looked down at Buddy, who was still staring at that door, every muscle tensed. "You recognize that, don't you?" Miller murmured. "That smell, that sound." The dog didn't blink. His nose twitched once, his tail lowered. A low whimper escaped his throat. Not fear this time, but memory. Miller glanced back at Willow, asleep in her crate, breathing shallow but steady. He didn't know what had tied these two souls together, but one thing was clear. Whatever had hurt them hadn't finished its work yet. He locked the door himself before leaving, double-checking each latch. Outside, thunder rolled far in the distance, crawling slowly toward town. By the time he reached his patrol car, the first raindrops had started to fall again, soft, steady, relentless. And back inside the shelter, Buddy lifted his head and looked once more at the door. His ears twitched at the sound of the rain, and for a long time he didn't move. Then, as lightning flashed outside, his reflection in the glass seemed to tremble, two shapes overlapping for just a heartbeat, a dog and a man. Somewhere out there, someone was coming back for what they left behind. Morning came gray and heavy. The storm hadn't passed. It had only gathered itself overnight, waiting for daylight to start again. Miller drove back to the shelter before his shift even started. He didn't tell anyone why. He just needed to see them. Inside, the air was thick with disinfectant and damp fur. The overnight volunteer was mopping near the kennels. "They didn't sleep," she said quietly when he walked in. "Neither of them." Buddy was lying beside Willow's crate again, just like before. His eyes were bloodshot but alert. Willow's bandages were clean now, her breathing steadier. "She's improving," the vet said, walking in from the exam room. "Still weak, but stable. We'll try soft food today." Miller crouched beside the crate. Willow blinked at him. Slow, wary. Buddy's tail brushed the floor once, the closest thing he gave to a greeting. "You did good," Miller said softly. "Both of you." He glanced at the vet. "Any update from animal control?" She shook her head. "No chips, no leads, but we did find something." She held out a small Ziploc bag. Inside it, a piece of rope, frayed and stiff with dried mud. "We pulled this from her neck," she said. "The knot's not random. Whoever tied it knew what they were doing. It's a slip noose, used for restraint." Miller's jaw tightened. "Farm equipment, or maybe training gear." The vet nodded. "There's residue on it too. Engine oil, maybe diesel, County Road 12. Industrial stretch. Old barns, a few truck depots, and an abandoned farmhouse at the far end." Miller had passed it 100 times, a rusted mailbox, no trespassing sign eaten by ivy. He pocketed the bag. "I'll check it." The vet hesitated. "You think that's where it happened?" He looked at Buddy. "I think he already knows where I'm going." The farmhouse sat alone on a hill, its roof sagging under years of weather. A tire swing hung limp from a dead oak tree. Mud tracks cut through the tall grass, fresh ones. Miller stepped out of the car and immediately felt eyes on him. The air smelled like oil, metal, and something worse, rot. He followed the tracks to a side shed. The padlock was broken. Inside, the floor was covered with straw, dark stains, and torn pieces of rope. He crouched, brushing one of them aside. Fur. Short, black and tan, Buddy's color. His stomach dropped. There were also claw marks on the wooden beams, deep ones, frantic, like an animal had tried to get out. He took photos, radioed dispatch. Possible abuse site. Send animal control backup. Then, from the corner of the shed, something caught his eye. A rusted food bowl half buried in dirt. The letters etched into the metal read, Buddy. He stared at it for a long moment, the air suddenly colder. Jesus, he whispered, they kept him here. He turned toward the open door. The storm clouds were moving fast again, dragging the light out of the sky. Whoever had been here hadn't just dumped them. They'd owned them, used them, hurt them. And then one day maybe Buddy fought back. Maybe that's why he'd been cut. Maybe that's why Willow ended up tied to a tree in the rain. By the time he got back to the station, his uniform was damp and his hands were shaking. He filed the report, attached photos, but something about the whole thing gnawed at him. It felt unfinished. He stayed late, digging through local records. One case popped up from 2 months ago. Illegal dogfighting bust, one suspect released on bail. Address, same stretch of road. The suspect's name was Ray Danner, former kennel owner. Known for breeding fighters, Miller scrolled through the file photos. Dogs with scarred muzzles, empty cages, a small cat wandering in the background of one of the pictures. A grey tabby with a white patch under her chin. Willow. He leaned back in his chair, heart pounding. She hadn't been just a stray. She'd lived there. Maybe as bait, maybe as a companion for the dogs before they were thrown into the ring. And Buddy, he'd probably been one of them. Trained to fight, forced to, but he didn't. He ran. He took her with him. Miller drove back to the shelter in the middle of the night. Rain slammed against the windshield again, lightning flashing across the road. He didn't care. When he arrived, the vet was still there, asleep in the staff room. The lights were dim. Buddy was awake. Sitting, waiting. Miller knelt in front of him. "I know what happened," he whispered. The dog tilted his head. "You protected her. You both got out. But they're still out there, aren't they?" Buddy didn't make a sound, but his eyes flicked toward the door again, the same one he'd been guarding since the night before. A loud crack split the air. The shelter lights flickered. Thunder followed a second later. The vet stirred, confused. "Power's unstable," she muttered, half awake. But Miller wasn't looking at the ceiling. He was staring at the door handle. It had just moved, barely. But it moved. He rose slowly. Buddy stood too, body rigid, tail straight. Outside, the wind howled. But underneath it, faint and uneven, there was another sound. Footsteps splashing through puddles, coming closer. Miller turned off his flashlight. He could feel Buddy trembling beside him, not from fear this time, from readiness. "Stay with me," he whispered. The handle turned again. The handle turned slowly, once, twice, then stopped. Rain hammered against the windows. The power flickered again, throwing long shadows across the floor. Miller took a step forward, hand hovering over his holster. "Who's there?" No answer. Just the steady tapping of rain and the faint metallic creak of the door. Buddy was beside him, silent now, muscles tense, eyes locked on that crack of light under the door. Willow stirred inside her crate, mewing weakly at the sound. Then a voice muffled, male. "Easy there, it's just me." Miller froze. He knew that voice. He'd heard it earlier that evening over the police scanner. Ray Danner, the man from the file. The door swung open. A large man stood in the doorway, soaked in rain, face half hidden by his hood. His hand clutched a heavy flashlight, but the way he held it, low, angled, it wasn't to see. It was to strike. "I'm here for my dog," he said. His voice was cold, flat, practiced. "And the cat." Miller's voice was steady. "You left them to die," Danner smirked. "You don't understand, officer. They're mine." Buddy growled, low, deep, guttural, a sound that came from memory. Miller raised his hand slightly. "Step back. The animals aren't yours anymore." Danner took another step inside, boots leaving wet prints on the tile. "That dog cost me $3,000. You think I'm leaving him here to rot?" "He saved a life," Miller said. "That's more than you ever did." Danner laughed, a short, ugly sound. "He's a fighter, not a hero." Then he moved, fast. The flashlight swung up, aiming for Miller's head. But before it connected, Buddy lunged. The impact was explosive. Fur, teeth, shouts, metal hitting the floor. The flashlight rolled under a table, flickering. Miller dove for it, trying to separate them, but Buddy wouldn't let go. Dana screamed, shoving him off, but the dog came back again, biting through the man's jacket, forcing him against the wall. Miller shouted, "Buddy, stop!" But it wasn't anger in his voice, it was fear that the dog who had spent his life fighting was being dragged back into that darkness. Then something shifted. Dana kicked hard, sending Buddy sprawling into a metal cart. It crashed loudly, instruments scattering across the floor. Willow let out a shrill, terrified cry from her crate. The sound froze Buddy. He blinked, chest heaving, eyes darting to her. That single cry, fragile, broken, was enough to pull him back. He didn't attack again. He stood panting, between Dana and the cat, body trembling, tail low, eyes steady. Dana spat blood onto the floor, clutching his arm. "You're still just an animal," he snarled. He pulled something from his coat and a small knife, dull but real. Miller aimed his gun. "Drop it!" For a split second, time held its breath. Then Dana lunged, not at Miller, but at the cat, straight toward Willow's crate. Buddy moved first. The sound was sharp, final. A snarl, a crash, and the shattering of glass. The knife clattered away, spinning under a table. Miller kicked it out of reach and forced Dana down, handcuffing him to the floor. "Don't move," Miller growled. When it was over, the room fell silent except for the rain. Buddy stood in front of the crate, chest heaving, one paw bleeding from the broken glass. Willow pressed her nose against the bars, her eyes wide. Miller holstered his weapon and knelt beside him. "It's over, boy," he whispered. Buddy turned his head, eyes meeting his, tired, deep, knowing. The storm outside roared, but in that moment, the shelter was still. Sirens approached in the distance. Backup was on its way. Dana muttered curses under his breath as he bled on the tile, but Miller wasn't listening. His hand rested on Buddy's neck, feeling the pulse still strong beneath the soaked fur. "You did it," he said softly. "You protected her. Again." Buddy blinked slowly, then lay down, pressing himself against the crate one last time. Willow's paw reached through the bars and rested on his muzzle. When the other officers arrived, Miller didn't move. He stayed there, one hand on Buddy's head, the other resting on the cold floor. The vet rushed in, eyes wide. "Is he—" "He's alive," Miller said. "Barely, but he's alive." Hours later, the shelter was quiet again. Dana was gone, cuffed and furious in the back of a squad car. The rain had stopped. Miller stood in the recovery room, watching as the vet stitched Buddy's paw. Willow lay beside him, free of her crate for the first time, her small body curled against his chest. "He won't let her go," the vet said softly. "Then don't make him," Miller replied. The vet smiled faintly. "You know, animals like this, they don't forget what they've seen, but they also don't forget who saved them." Miller nodded. "Neither do we." He stayed with them until dawn. The first light of morning slipped through the blinds, pale and quiet. Willow opened her eyes, nudged Buddy's neck, and purred. Buddy lifted his head weakly, pressing his nose against hers. No growls, no barks, just the small sound of two survivors recognizing each other again. Miller reached out and touched Buddy's head. "You're safe now," he whispered. "Both of you." Outside, the storm had finally broken. The air smelled clean. For the first time in a long time, Miller felt something shift inside him. Something he hadn't let himself feel in years. Hope. He looked back at them one last time before turning off the lights. The cat, side by side on the blanket, both breathing the same slow rhythm. That night, he didn't just save a dog. He saved the last piece of his heart that still believed in loyalty.